when we're thinking about change, the first thing I want to ask is, what are your values? What are your goals? Because until then, we can't make a decision about what's more helpful versus harmful.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, Counseling and Behavioral Health in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our vice president in charge of the behavioral health department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are a podcast designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So our guest today joins us from Seattle. They are the founder of Tice Consulting and Therapy. They are a psychotherapist, they're a personal trainer, and they're a consultant. All of these services coming together to provide a holistic approach to health and wellness and well-being. They're going to share with us today about their own personal experience in counseling and how that helped them to inform themselves about what they need from counseling and what others might need from counseling as well. So we want to welcome Jayden Aubryn to the show today. Welcome, Jayden.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Julie and Chrissa.
Wonderful to meet you, and thank you so much for being here. So tell us a little bit about Tice Consulting and Therapy and the services that you provide there.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm very into holistic health, and so that means understanding the whole body, but also the systems that the body is interacting in. So, I do psychotherapy and I do a lot of somatic work. I also do personal training, and sometimes I have clients who do both therapy and personal training. So we are managing their symptoms and working towards goals from both of those directions. And then I also do consulting to try and make the environment a bit better for people to live in, right? If we're in a sick environment, it makes sense that we are feeling sick. And so trying to make a healthier environment for workplaces and for community organizations.
So you mentioned like decolonizing, like how we see therapy. Can you talk about like how your therapy services that you offer are different from a traditional therapy?
Yes. So in every consultation I have, I tell people I am not your typical therapist. I'm not a blank slate therapist. So by that, I mean, I will not just have a neutral face and then nod and slightly validate and repeat back what you say. I believe a lot in relational healing. And so I show up as a person with appropriate boundaries, of course, as a therapist, but I still show up as a human, and I work to build an appropriate relationship with my clients, because if we can heal those relational wounds, they can take that healing and then apply it to other relational wounds with families, friends, etc. I also am going to just talk about a lot of things that sometimes people are uncomfortable. I love talking about poop. I think that if you ask someone how they're doing and they respond with their poop, you know exactly how they're doing, right? I'm going to ask how your libido is and if you are satisfied with it. Right now, is it low or high, but are you satisfied with it? We're going to bring in your sexual life. We're going to bring in your eating. We're going to wiggle. We're going to be goofy. We're going to joke. I think a lot of times people think therapy is just so, I come in, I sit down, I cry, I talk about hard things. Therapist says something wise, I leave, I'm healed. And it's just not like that, right? We're going to talk about hard things. So when there can be fun, let's have it, right? When we can make a coping skill or healing fun, let's do that. And I think it really helps just build that relationship and make healing less scary.
Yeah, absolutely. When we can say how we're feeling as a human, it does really connect us into our body. Even when we're doing breath work, to be able to feel more connected into our body, we get so into our minds, and our minds are very important and useful to us, but they're not who we are. Our thoughts are not who we are, but it gets so, our identity can get so tied into that. And so when we talk about our poop, right, when we talk about our bodily functions, it really can bring us more into that present moment and noticing the connection with our body as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes you're so right about like this blank canvas mirror therapy idea, because it is what we see. And when people say, name me a therapist, right? A lot of people will say Sigmund Freud, and they'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, you lay on a couch, and then the person doesn't even look at you. They just write notes and and so that idea, I think, of what counseling is can be pretty prohibitive for so many people, because they're like, I can do that to the wall. I could talk to
Hmm.
anything. And sometimes a cat can be more therapeutic than that kind of relationship, because it isn't a relationship. And so I love what you're saying about showing up and being a person. And what it means to be a person is to be imperfect. And I think
Yeah.
that therapy uh, idea that sometimes we have is this like perfect idea. They have to be the expert. They have to, know all of the stuff. They always have to say the right thing and be wise and all of that. And it's like they're
Nope.
literally a human being.
And I
Even
have
they're better.
clients. I have clients say that to me when I suggest like a coping skill or an alternative way of thinking. They'll say, "Well, it's easy for you to say that. You're a therapist." And I'm like, did you think I just shot out my mom's vagina with these coping strategies ingrained in me? Like, no, I'm a human and I've learned these things. You're a human, you can learn these things. And sometimes I show up with imperfections because we all have them, right? Like, for example, I have ADHD, and sometimes my thoughts are weird, and my speech is not incredibly linear, and I get distracted in the middle of a sentence, and I can say, hold on a second, let me bring my thoughts back together and try again because we kind of stopped there. And I think being able to show that natural stuff of like, okay, you're paying me to be this expert, and still sometimes I struggle with linear speech, and sometimes I forget what I'm saying, and that's okay, right? It doesn't devalue me as a person. So if you have those same things, it doesn't devalue you either.
How do you think you got to be that type of therapist? Like, I know you mentioned like you were able to take things that didn't work for you in traditional therapy. How did you kind of learn the way that works best for you with interacting with your clients?
I think I've always thought a bit outside the box. So I got my graduate degree in Kentucky, um, and I was one of the only Black students in my master's cohort. Um, Definitely the only genderqueer person, at least that I knew of, or anything. And so when I was learning everything from a very like white female perspective, I was already thinking like, this wouldn't really work for my communities. Like, or even as a child, like, I remember therapists would say this to me when I was in therapy as a child, and I hated that, right? And because there's cultural differences. And so and our teachers were like, yes, think about cultural differences. So everything they told me, I was like, well, how would this apply to my culture? And I just started thinking a bit more creatively. And so I took that, and then I also adopted this philosophy as after I graduated and was working, that I didn't want to have all these different sides of me, right? I really loved being able to find skills that applied in every area of my life, right? With my friends, with my family, with work, right? So, for example, I was very anxious, and I would always read into, everyone's like nonverbals and like, did they mean this? Did they mean that? And I decided, you know what? They can tell me what they mean, right? You can use direct communication to tell me what you mean. I'm not reading into it. This is too much work. It's too much anxiety for me. And I got to apply that at work, with friends, with everyone. And I was like, wow, this is easy. This is not three different skills. This is one skill I can apply everywhere. And so I kind of took that concept and just kept expanding on it. How much of me can I show up as in a therapy session? I don't want to necessarily have a different persona. I think it's appropriate to have boundaries as a therapist, but I don't need to be a different person. And so figuring out like, what does it look like for me, Jayden, to be a therapist consistently and authentically? And I am someone who's goofy. I'm someone who likes to dance and move and talk about poop and food and have fun when I can. So that's the energy that I bring into my therapy sessions.
Yeah, I love that. We're full human beings and we are ourselves inside all the time. We sometimes have to, or we sometimes feel like we have to put on our different, well, with this person, I need to be this way, and with this person, I need to be this way. And you use the word exhausting, and that is exhausting. This past weekend, I had my parents are thinking about moving to my state, and so I was meeting up with this realtor that I love, and I've had a really great working relationship with her. And when we left the place, she texted me and she was like, "I am so sorry. I usually try to bring such good energy, and I was not." Feeling good, right, in my stomach, and she just said the whole thing, and I was like, I don't need you to be on, right? Like, I don't need you to turn it on when we're together. And I like that you don't, that it's not salesy when I'm with you. And I think that people do pick up on that. They can pick up on, like, oh, this person is acting this way around me versus, oh, like, that's who that person is. And whether or not they like who that person is, they can tell that, okay, but whether I like that or not, being genuine is in itself a trust practice. It is them showing me being able to show them I trust this person. And when you were talking about, have when we do the mind reading of, oh, that person walked into the office and did not say hi to me, right? Like, did I do something wrong, right? Or are they upset when I do this or that? And being able to say, no, I'm going to trust that if that person is upset with me, if I have made a mistake, or if we have disagreed on something and I'm not aware of it, I'm going to trust that that person is going to say it to me. And if they do not say it to me, then I'm not going to take on those what ifs. And I just really love that because we can't control other people, but it's also, we don't have a tendency towards trust in our societies anymore. We've got so many different technologies and different things that kind of separate us, right? We don't need to go to the grocery store anymore. We don't need to go to the post office anymore. We don't need to do these things that kind of connect our communities. And so it can be so much more difficult, I think, to trust others around us. So I loved what you said about trust, just trusting other people to do that or not.
Yeah, and I think this goes into like being able to trust your body as well, with a lot of like trust is trust, right? And so if you can develop trust in one area, you can start to apply it in others.
Tell us more about building trust in ourselves, in our bodies, because you're a personal trainer, and so there's so much to that, I'm sure. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I do use like a lot of physical, like fitness and health
Oh,
examples with this. So, for instance, um, a lot of times when I talk about building trust with your body, people think that means thinking that you can do anything in the world, right? And that's not trust, right? Trust comes with understanding your limitations and boundaries. So I know that I've never done a backflip before. So for me to say, I'm going to do a backflip off of my second floor balcony, right? I am trusting myself to know that I cannot do that, And if I were to do that, I would probably severely injure myself. That is trust. And then that applies to your having a relationship with your feelings, right? So if you know that you tend to be anxious around other people, and then you start to have these thoughts of, oh, this new person I met, I don't know if they like me, they looked at me kind of weird. You can trust that you're more likely to have those thoughts when they're not true than like when they are, right? Like you can trust your body to be a little sensitive to that, which lets you know, let me find some hard data first before I really commit to that decision. And I think we also need to like trust our capacities. So when you go to the gym, one of the things you have to learn is, what is discomfort, what is a burn, and what is pain that can cause injury, right? And there is a whole spectrum there. And there's a moment where that discomfort and burn is really, really similar to pain, but it's slightly different. And it's only through like experience and sometimes going a little too far that you start to actually find where that line is. And then you say, oh, I need to back off a little bit. I need to like take care of myself. Maybe I wanted to lift this heavier weight, but today's not the day for whatever reason. We don't need to judge ourselves. Like every day you show up differently to the gym, not the day. Or, oh, this is uncomfortable, but I got this, right? I can hold this plank for a little bit longer. Like I know I don't want to, but I can actually do this. Like this is fine. And you take those same skills into your mental health healing as well, right? I specialize in trauma, and it's not always helpful to just dig into trauma right away, right? If you don't have the coping skills or the support system to really manage, all the sensations that come up when we do trauma work, then we want to be really intentional about how we're engaging with your trauma and maybe focus on building those skills and those supports, right? And you have to learn your capacity along the way. Okay, we've talked about trauma 3 weeks in a row, and I'm realizing that I need to take a break, right? Like I need to just kind of focus on recovering my body versus, okay, this is uncomfortable. I'm feeling anxious. I'm not about to have a panic attack. I can keep having these conversations and I can self-regulate along the way. All of this takes time, right? Building trust takes time. I am not expecting anyone to trust anything after a day, a week, a month, right? If you got, oh, it's my new bestie, and I'm trusting them with the keys to my apartment after I've known them for a month, oh, we need to talk about that. And some people do that, and that's how it's, right? That's holistic healthcare. We're working on this on all levels, right? Trust takes time. We need to identify red flags and green flags. And so, yeah, that was a very like long-winded answer about trust, but I think it's very important and applies to a lot of different areas.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned like you have some of your patients or clients who do both your personal training and your therapy. Is it a lot of like overlapping then? Do you talk a lot about trauma and those therapy things while personal training, or do you kind of try and keep them separate?
I do usually try to keep them separate, though, if something really emotional just happened, for like any of my personal training clients, like it's really good to know that they're bringing that into my space, into the space, the personal training space, though we're not gonna, process that through training. Though I might alter the exercises that we're doing. So a lot of the specialty I have is like using movement for mental health very specifically. And so there are different types of movements and different ways to exercise and ways to adjust and exercise to address mental health in various ways. So if someone had a very distressing day, I might, instead of doing like a lat pull down, if I want to work their upper, their lats and their back, I'll have them do a medicine ball slam, right? So you're getting a similar motion, you're working the same muscles, but that slamming motion is going to be training the power in your body, and it's great for emotional release and getting that energy out versus kind of like the slow pull down strength building of like on a lat pull down machine. That is going to maybe just add more stress to the body when they've already have a lot of emotional stress. So I don't want to add that stress on. I want to release it. And so I will, just change the workouts a little bit in that way.
Absolutely. There's some, sometimes there are things that you experience and then you go, oh, that's just kind of like part of my life now. And there was one, I did this training one time on somatic yoga, and the every time, like, I'll find myself doing this movement like behind me, like throwing. And one of the yoga moves was like pulling out, like you're weeding, and then throwing those behind you. And I find myself doing that movement sometimes, not usually when I'm around people, but I will find myself doing it, right? If I'm getting flooded or if I'm feeling overwhelmed in a situation, I'll find myself doing that. And it's not always a conscious thing anymore where I'll do it, but I can feel that. And when you said, slamming down the medicine ball, that ability to be able to move that energy through our body and be able to process it through physically, then allows for that space for our body and our mind to be able to process through and move the energy of the emotions through our body. And so I love that you're taking those pieces into consideration as you're creating these plans for people, because every day is different. And some days that isn't going to be helpful to me because I need to hold on to certain things because I'm not ready to move it through my body, right? I haven't uh, learned from it yet. I haven't experienced it fully yet. And I might not be ready to do that day. And so that moving it through my body movement isn't necessarily going to be the thing that day. So I just really love that you take all of that into consideration. And you had talked about going through grad school and seeing these cultural differences with it. Research is so weird. When I got my doctorate, I was like, oh, all the evidence-based stuff we've been learning is based on 12 people right out of college. And so it was like, so eye-opening. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, who were the participants in this study? Like, oh, they were 20-year-old white people. Okay, is that going to be relevant to me, right? Is that going to be? And so, um, as I was going through grad school too, there were so many pieces that I'd go look at the research and go like, okay, but who is this research on? Because is that going to be applicable to me and my family and my culture? And so I'd love to hear some of those things that you kind of learned as you went, those creative thinking pieces of how you decided, no, these pieces don't necessarily work for queer people or for non-binary people. What were some of those pieces that you were able to develop?
Yeah. I feel like there's like so many different things, but I think right now I will choose to pick on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and some of the like reflection and validation that like we're taught to do as therapists. Um, at least growing up in my like Black community, we it's very direct, um, and it's just kind of like get to the point. And so when there's all of this like circular, like, oh, so this is, so you're feeling this, I'm repeating back, I'm reflecting back. It's actually like, yes, I just said that. Like, are you not listening to me? Like, why are we not moving this conversation along? Like, it's one step after another, and you're just like a little toddler who has to put the right foot on the next step, and then the left foot on that step, and then the right, like that's, it's just, it was really uncomfortable. It's not how we naturally communicate. Um, and with CBT, I think there's a lot of you just stay in your mind, and there's a lot of communities where it's like we don't think about this, right? Like we're not going to talk about this thing. It doesn't mean we don't process it or engage with it, but we're not going to talk about it because talking about it can be painful, it can be dangerous. And so in a lot of community spaces I grew up with, like these things were processed through music, and they were processed through movement and art and glances, and just like facial expressions, right? I feel like Black people are known for like having We can have very dramatic facial expressions. We can have a whole conversation and not say a word, right? That is a lot of how we will communicate nuance. And so to make everything verbal and then like in a very cognitive behavioral way didn't always make sense to me. Now the skills, the principles, yes, they do make sense, right? Like I understand we got to work on, distorted cognitions, and you can do that, right? But we can also do that through art and movement. So sometimes I'll have people like, if they are really into like art and colors, I'm like, okay, well, what colors represent this for you, right? What colors do you want to represent? Like, how do you want to feel color-wise, right? You're feeling red, you want to feel blue. Or I teach movement workshops, right? Healing through movement workshops. And so I'll have people think of a situation that they want to process and then move their body, right? And that's it, right? Just move their body. There is no like specific dance style. I describe it when I'm advertising as just like, college girl on a Molly at a rave. Like that's the type of movement we're doing, right? Just we're wiggling around, but move your body and see what types of movement your body is doing as you think about this scenario. And then think about another scenario and just move your body. Okay, what different types of movement did you do? From there, you can start to build a vocabulary. Oh, like for example, I know when I'm dancing and I do a lot of footwork, I'm probably feeling anxious. I think it's a subconscious way for my body to want to run away. So I started bringing in those things, right? We see this with like church communities, after school activities. Like this is how I processed everything growing up. And a lot of the friends I knew processed everything. So I took the science I was learning from school and then also did my own research. There's a lot of science around music therapy, art therapy, dance therapy, etc. And then I brought that into my practice.
And I heard you talk about too, when you do consulting, you talk about like how to have like a healthy environment around you. Can you explain like what you consider a healthier environment and like suggestions you give for people?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it really depends on what I'm consulting about. Usually a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, but from a trauma-informed perspective. So I take the framework that, when we look at the nervous system response, implicit bias and anxiety are basically the same thing. And to tell someone to not be racist is like saying don't be traumatized, right? Like that is not that simple. Most people are not like, yeah, I'm racist, right? Like most people's values don't align with that. And yet their body is having this somatic reaction that is causing them to act in, not value aligned way. And so really coming in and like normalizing that and then building the healthy environment, right, is that trusting one where people feel like they can start to work through those reactions in a not harmful way, right? So sometimes, a lot of times that's bringing awareness and again, normalizing and not judging because you can't heal from a place of judgment and shame. And then it's helping to build up systems. So say a manager is having, some implicit bias and therefore harmful reactions to their supervisee. Well, they don't process that with the supervisee, right? Because there's this power differential. So what systems do we need to put in place so the manager can speak with someone either at their, power level or higher to work through this without fear of repercussion, of losing their job, but, where we can hold compassionate accountability. Like we're going to hold you accountable, and we're also going to do this in a compassionate and empathetic way. And how can we build systems that allow for there to be bidirectional feedback? So maybe the supervisor is aware that there's this bias and they're not acting according to their values, and maybe they're not, right? So how are there going to be systems in place that are sustainable and not reliant on just one person who could leave and then everything crumbles, right? But how can there be a system where someone can provide that feedback to the supervisor, again, without repercussions, without, risk of losing their job, without risk of retaliation, and to build this trusting environment with everyone to say, like, we're all working towards this goal together, and we're all going to do these things that we don't like at some point. And so let's support one another and not judge each other for having these reactions while holding each other accountable for the harm that is being caused.
Absolutely. I think as you brought up the power differential in workplaces, especially in families, there's a power differential. In workplaces, there's that power differential. And it is a challenging situation to be able to say, okay, as a human, right? Like aside from the structure of the organization or whatever power differential there might be between supervisor and supervisee, as a human, I might want to talk out that situation, right? Like, because if I'm not in my supervisor role or leadership role, that's what I'd want to do. Like it's like let's just get it all, let's just say all of it, and see where we land. And but when it comes to the work environment, we do have to be careful with that. And so, that desire to like, please just tell me everything so that I can just tell you everything, everything that like I understand about it or whatever. And then you can tell me, or first you can tell me what you understand about it. And I can tell you what I understand about it. And then we can, hopefully understand where everybody's coming from. But because of that, like, no, I don't want to put somebody in a position, right, where they have to talk with somebody who has that power differential, right, about the situation. So I love what you're doing with that consulting, because I think it is very important. And I think it can be tricky to say, okay, well, as a human, this is what I would jump in and do. But you also talk about like, well, if that's what you would do as a human, like you're still a human when you're a supervisor. You're still that same human when you're a leader. You're still that same human when you are being a therapist versus being a mom, right? Like you're still that same person. And so it's like, systemically it feels, and especially like from a leadership role too, systemically sometimes it can feel like, okay, well, I'm in that role and so I have to be aware of, right, the dynamic of it, but also like then it feels like suppressing that human part of myself. And so it is so tricky. So I love that you're out there doing that consulting work. I think it's so important. How might somebody recognize that there are changes that can be made in their workplace or in their community or in their family?
Well, there's always changes that can be made. There's infinite changes. I think I take this framework of, is it helpful or is it harmful? The only thing you have to actually do in this world is die, right? Like you don't need to do anything else, right? Everything
I
else,
love that so much. That's the only thing you have to do. Oh my gosh, I love that.
yeah. If you're like, oh, I have to answer this text, I have to show, you don't have to do anything except for die, right? But what is more helpful or more harmful? And that is going to be dependent on your values, right? So if you are someone who really values showing up for your community, then instead of having your luxurious night in with your fuzzy socks and your bowl of popcorn, your friend just went through a breakup, you're going to go show up for them, right? That's going to be more helpful and versus harmful for your values. And any example down the road. So when you were thinking about change, the first thing I want to ask is, what are your values? What are your goals? Because until then, we can't make a decision about what's more helpful versus harmful. And this can even be of like, I know I need to respond to this email, or I know I need to like have a difficult conversation with this person. Well, what is your goal and your intention with this conversation? Do you want to educate them about, something? Do you want to make it clear how you were emotionally impacted? Do you want to just tell them about themselves, right? Because based off of your answer, what's going to be more helpful to achieving that goal is going to be different. So knowing your values, knowing your goals.
And you mentioned that you have a Patreon that you use to help make therapy more accessible. So are your resources or all the like the consulting, the counseling, all that? Is it telehealth as well? Is it in person? How are you using that to help make it more accessible to people?
Yes. So therapy is expensive. And it's expensive with both time and money and energy. And so my goal is to make it financially accessible. So the lowest tier is $5 a month. Um, and also you can go at your own pace and you can look at the things that you want to look at. Um, right? So you don't need to look at every single offering I have, right? Maybe you just want to focus on the coping skills. Maybe you just want to focus on, food and nutrition for mental health specifically, right? You get to choose and have autonomy. And I think it's also a way to just make my knowledge accessible across state lines, right? Because we have limitations on who we can see and serve. Um, so just wanting to, I spent a lot of money like learning these things. I have like 28 letters after my name. It's very obnoxious. And I don't want other people to have to spend that much time or money. I think a lot of the stuff that I've spent thousands of dollars for at this point was actually quite intuitive. And I probably could have like looked up some of these scientific research articles on my own and learned the same information for free. And so essentially, like if I've already put in that investment, I don't want other people to have to put in that investment. So distributing that knowledge more widely.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. $5 a month, that's manageable. That's something that, more people can do than paying for therapy every week. So I love that. And it also is a way and there's so much stigma about mental health therapy and counseling in general. And so just being able to say, like, no, I'm going to dip my toe in. I'm not going to worry about all this other stuff that can be very overwhelming. Just the idea of going to an office to meet a brand new person and them asking you questions for that can be very overwhelming. And so this ability to come and join the community that you've got going, and being able to use those resources and learn that information, I think is so helpful. So I love that. And that is at Patreon. And your company is Tice Consulting and Therapy. So Tice Consulting and Therapy on Patreon. It's really easy to find when you go on Patreon. If you search TISE Consulting, very, very easy to find and very easy to navigate that website with the different kind of tiers of investment that people might want to make and the different resources that people can get. Wonderful. I am never going to forget that you said the only thing you have to do in life is die. I can't like I when I was in college, one of my undergrad degree was not in anything that I use. It was in criminal justice. I really don't use that degree, but I am so glad that I went to college and did that because one of my teachers said, you don't have to wear shoes. You don't have to come to class. You don't have to wear shoes. You don't have to we were in Rhode Island. You don't have to be in Rhode Island for the rest of the day. You can go to the airport, right, and try to talk somebody into flying you to another state. That every single thing that we do in our lives, including show up to class, put socks on, put shoes on when I walk outside and get on the bus, that each of those things are choices that we're making, and that in a society where it can feel, for so many different reasons, that we don't have choices in our lives. The fact that no, when I'm putting on shoes to go out and catch the bus or go to class, it's because I am making an active choice to put shoes on because I don't have to, and I just love that. And now I'm always gonna think, gosh, yeah, the only thing I have to do is die, and everything else that I'm doing in my life is an active choice that I'm making. I might not like the choices I have, right? Like I might not love either choice, but I do have those choices.
Yeah, and I think this is the being in Seattle with all the tech workers is rubbing off on me. But I like to think of it as like like your default programming, or it's like our autopilot like programming and how we function. It's like, oh, uh, this is how I'm going to go about my day. And these are the things I should be doing in my life, right? And we all have kind of that like default programming from like what our parents taught us, our personal like preferences, societal teachings, what we've been exposed to, etc. And so you can choose to operate on that default system, or you can choose to be really intentional and ask yourself, do I want this? Is it helpful versus harmful? I think it's something like, I always forget the percentage. It's 90, 95, something like that percent. It's anywhere between 85 and 95, so, don't quote me on it. But percentage of sensory input is that we receive is unconscious or subconscious, right? Is not brought to our conscious awareness. So most of the things that we are absorbing in the world, we are not consciously aware of. And so we can imagine that a lot of the decisions that we're making, we're not consciously aware of, right? This in that autopilot default programming. When you start getting bugs in your system, right? Usually when you're not being value aligned, that's a good moment to be like, let me look at this. Why is this not working the way that I want to? And let's be more intentional about the decisions that I make, right? That's implicit bias right there. I'm having a default reaction that I'm afraid of this person, or that, let's just say, I'm afraid of this person. Let me notice that reaction and then intentionally and consciously look at the evidence and say, oh, there's nothing they're doing that's actually scary. Don't need to judge myself for having that reaction, but I need to start rewiring this default thing. And that just takes practice and time. Same thing with anxiety, same thing with low motivation, right? I don't want to get out of bed. Okay, let me really think about that. Where is it helpful or harmful? Do you really need to rest, or do you need to move around and get your energy flowing? So yeah, you can think about it as about, are you choosing your default autopilot system? Are you choosing to be intentional? You don't need to be intentional all the time, right? But choosing when you are going to be intentional.
I would love to hear about your own personal counseling experiences too. I know you noted you had a great one and a bad one. So if we could kind of hear like both, and like which came first, and if it was the bad one, like what led you to continue into counseling and get a better experience?
Yeah, I had a couple of bad experiences. One when I was a child, I think that there was a lot of family dysfunction, and I think my therapist actually could have been helpful, but my mom like came into every session and stayed for the whole session, and it was not supposed to be family therapy. It was supposed to be my individual therapy. Um, and I think that, maybe shows some of how unhealthy that dynamic was. But I really wish that therapists had set some boundaries, so I had that chance to build a relationship and learn some skills. I was, one of those kids who got misdiagnosed as bipolar when I had ADHD, and was just immediately put on a lot of drugs that numbed me out. And I really wish I just have someone teach me coping skills. Is why I'm so big into teaching coping skills now and making that accessible for people. Not saying that medications aren't helpful, but again, I wanted that option. No one gave me that choice. And then as I got older, it was after I already became a therapist, I realized that just because I was a therapist, it doesn't mean that I don't still need a therapist, which that was a whole journey to to get to that conclusion. But I told my therapist, I was like, I can CBT, I can do cognitive behavioral therapy in my sleep. Do not use that with me. That's not what I'm focused on. I'm trying to get into my body. I already over intellectualize things, like help me get into my body. And he just like wouldn't listen to me. He was very unwilling to let me talk about any of the trauma that I was coming to process, which there are reasons to put pauses on someone talking about trauma, but he didn't explain if there was like he was doing it for a reason, or he just didn't want to talk about that. He didn't feel comfortable. So I felt very unheard. And I don't know, one time I was having an asthma flare because there was a smoke storm here in Seattle from fire season, and it was 2020, and so you couldn't go anywhere because everything was shut down. And then I couldn't go outside because I couldn't breathe. And I'm a mover, and that's how I manage a lot of my ADHD is through movement. And I didn't want to do any movement. I didn't even want to do yoga. So I didn't want to get an asthma attack to send me to the hospital where COVID was pre-vaccine. So I just had like a week of suffering and just like feeling very sick because I couldn't breathe, and also very restless and antsy in my body because I had too much energy and my ADHD wasn't being managed without movement. And he told me to pet my cat and to experience how good or even just neutral petting my cat was, and that it wasn't bad. And I was like, I am physically ill. I have asthma as a physical health diagnosis. Like, petting my cat will not cure the fact that I can't breathe, right? And I really just needed some validation. One, two, I told you not to do that classic CBT crap on me, right? It's not crap, but like that's not what I wanted. I was very clear about, what I wanted out of therapy. And it was just so frustrating. I felt so unheard. So those were like the two like highlighted like not great therapy experiences. But the one that went really well is the therapist I got right after that guy who told me to pet my cat. And I've been with her now for 4 years, and she is like very somatically oriented. I told her, I was like, I can over intellectualize everything. I struggle with feeling things. And now do I feel things? Did she get me into my body? And every time I'm like, feelings are the worst. Why are they like this? And she's always like, do you remember when we first met and you wanted to feel your feelings? So you're always saying they're the worst, but you wanted this. And I'm like, stop reminding me. But yeah, she's really good at just kind of being direct with me, calling me out on my stuff, not letting me like do the little intellectual circles, and reorienting me back into my body. It's a really good fit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that gets so missed. The coming back into our body. You're doing it through food, you're doing it through movement, you're doing it through music. Just the vibrations of music can bring us back into what is my body feeling? What is my body doing for me right now? And what is it doing uh, while I'm not noticing it, right? And so I love that you're doing that for your clients, and that you were able to identify that, like, no, there are all of these techniques that are very useful for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are very in their body, right? And need a little bit more of that, like identifying and being able to notice those thoughts and all of that. And then there are people who are like, no, I'm always in there, right? Like, I notice every thought, and then that thought spirals out into 100 more thoughts, and then those spiral out into 100 more. And so like I'm good up there, right? Like, I know about that, but I don't know when I'm hungry, like I don't know when I'm tired. And no, I'm not being lazy. I should actually lay down because my body is tired, right? So I just love that it gives people permission, right? Like, I know in my head, oh, I don't need anybody's permission to do anything. But at the same time, when I see other people doing it, it allows me to go, okay, like they're doing it, they survived it, right? I can do the same thing. And I can identify to any therapist that I work with, like, this is what works for me, and this is what does not work for me. And I'm allowed to expect that they will respect.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jayden. This has been wonderful. I feel like there's so much more we could talk about together too. So we'd love to have you on another time, maybe in 6 months or in a year, just to kind of catch up with you again. I think what you're doing is amazing. So
Yeah, I
thank you
love
so
that.
much.
This has been a blast. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you can find Jayden on patreon.com. Tice Consulting and Therapy, TISE Consulting and Therapy, for therapy services, for consulting services, for your workplace, for your community, and then also that physical training piece as well, being able to integrate that in, I just think is so helpful and beautiful. So thank you for everything you're doing.
For sure. I am Jayden Aubryn, and I need a counselor.
I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236. We'll see you for the next episode, Sunday at 5.